Good day, good people. My name is Brad King, and this is the Downtown Writers Jam video podcast, which is part of the Solid Listen Podcast Network. We're coming to you from deep inside the Jam Bunker on this beautiful and lovely December day. Holidays are heating up. No matter what you celebrate, I hope that you are maintaining your sanity and your empathy and your kindness, because the last couple weeks of the year can get a little out of control. Got some fun stuff today. Fun, like if you're a nerd like me and you like a lot of information coming at you. On the show is Elizabeth B. Splaine, who we've had on the program before. She's been on the Jam. She's got a new book out called Swan Song. And we started having this conversation, and we actually talked. This is the first time I've ever had to seriously edit down the video podcast, because we talked for like an hour and a half, hour and 15 minutes. And that's longer than the Jam. But about halfway through, like, we were having this one conversation that was very lovely, and it was sort of very much like what I normally do. And then I asked about the book, and she started going into all this history and this research and the people that the story was based on and who was real and who wasn't. And it was fascinating. I mean, we went down this sort of World War II historical rabbit hole that was just riveted. And if you're just listening, you're not going to see multiple times throughout the episode. I grabbed my face because I'm like, fuck, like, how do I not know this? Like, how do I not know this? So it's really entertaining, and it's in a way that these shows normally aren't. And the fact that we're really taking a deep dive into the research, not process, not any of that stuff, things that I don't talk about, we still didn't talk about. But we just started having this discussion about the history, because I'm super fascinated by how writers have been doing research in COVID, particularly historical fiction writers who can't really go do the stuff that they need to do, can't visit places and all that kind of stuff. So the genesis of this idea, the research and the people are going to knock your socks off. I promise you. So I've had, like I said, I had Elizabeth on the show before. She wrote a series of books, the Blind thrillers, the Blind Order and the Blind Knowledge, as well as Devil's Grace, which was the winner of the When Worlds Count writing competition and released through Green Writers Press. It's fascinating. And if you like, this is the stuff we talked about on the Jam. So if like this, you're going to want to go listen to that episode as well. She got an AB in psychology from Duke and an MHA from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. She spent 11 years working in healthcare before switching to careers to become a professional opera singer and voice teacher. That did not end where you thought that was going to end. When she's not writing, she's teaching classical voice in Rhode Island, where she lives with her husband, sons, and dogs. So if you haven't listened to that episode, the Jam, the full one, there's that whole thing. And then this one is going to be a walk through the research and the history of her book, Swan Song. And there's a moment near the end where the book title, after you get through all of this stuff, you're going to just have one of those, holy shit, like this book. So before we get to that interview, a little bit of business. The Jam, our hour-long program, comes out every Wednesday. The video podcasts come out Monday and Friday. A couple things you can do to help us introduce authors to new people. Think about folks in your life that like books, tell them about our show, and then go leave us a review. Apple Podcasts, you can do that if you have an iPhone. If you don't have an iPhone, head to the Facebook page, The Writers Jam, click on review, do your business. You can check out the video podcasts at thewritersjam.com. You can always catch the audio wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're looking for books while you're at the website, we have reviews and a bookshop link that you can click to support local and independent bookstores across the country. Sign up for a monthly newsletter, and you can support everybody on the Solid Listen Podcast Network. I think it's $1 or $5 a month, and you get commercial-free episodes, bonus content from everybody. Malls and Nicole are working their asses off and building this network out, so there's just a ton of stuff behind the Patreon wall. Well, listen, I hope that the holiday season is treating you well. I know it can be hard for some folks, so if it is going well for you, make sure you're looking out for your friends and the people around you. And if it's not, reach out and talk to somebody. This is not a time of year to try to do stuff alone. It never is, but this time is hard on people. So make sure you're taking care of yourself, and letting other people take care of you, which is a thing that most humans are pretty bad at. For now, I hope that you will sit back and enjoy what is going to be a conversation that knocks your socks off, like I said, with Elizabeth B. Splaine.
Swan Song started, I didn't realize it. Swan Song started for me probably 15 years ago. So I was singing with I'm a retired opera singer. So at the time I was singing with Central Pennsylvania Youth Opera, Children's Opera Company. Actually, I wasn't singing with them yet. My son his friend was in a show and he ended up singing with them. So we went to see the show. The show was called Brundabar. I knew nothing about it. The director of the youth opera is a woman named Addie Applebaum. And I ended up chatting with her afterwards. She and I had met when I did a recital, long story. Anyway, so we went to the show and one of my voice students was also in the show. This voice student contacted a woman named Inga Auerbacher, who lives in New York, who was 5 years old in Terezin, the concentration camp, where Brundabar was performed over 55 times during World War II. This woman, Inga, came from New York. She has a book out she's had it out for years, called I Am a Star. It's about her 3 years in Terezin. And she spoke before the performance. And as you can imagine, it was, I was speechless. I mean, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. So that led me to read every single book I could get my hand on written by kids who were in that camp, who obviously were grown when they wrote the book. So I read all those books. I had always had a fascination with Eva Braun, Hitler's lover and then wife for 24 hours. And so I read a biography or two about her. I read everything I could get my hands on online about the concentration camp and about that children's opera. Hans Krascha was a Czech composer who wrote Brundabar, and it was performed at an orphanage before World War II happened. When Jews were being rounded up, he was taken and sent to Theresienstadt in German, or Terezin in Czech. And it was a camp. It was called not my words, Country Club of Concentration Camps. It was it was actually literally referred to as a spa town initially by the Nazis. And World War I heroes and artistic people of note, Jewish, were sent to this camp. So this camp had composers, conductors, artists of all genres and media. I mean, it was unbelievable the talent that was in this camp, in addition to the World War I heroes. Hans Krascha was sent to this camp. He smuggled in half of the score of Brundabar, and he recreated it by memory. And after recreating the score, it was performed more than 55 times. It's a story about two kids who are trying to go out and buy milk for their mother, but they don't have enough money. And so there's a mean organ grinder named Brundabar who is really loud. The kids are singing, trying to get some money, trying to earn some money to buy some milk, but the organ grinder keeps drowning them out. So they team up with a dog and a cat and some other animals to become a chorus. And then they end up raising enough money, and they end up kind of bashing on Brundabar, and he goes away. Brundabar, of course, was Hitler in this, and when Krascha wrote it, he acknowledged that. Brundabar had a little mustache, just like Hitler. And the kids, during one of these performances, at the very end of the performance, did a Heil Hitler salute, an ironic Heil Hitler salute at the end. All of the kids in almost every performance were shipped east. Every performance, and yet they still chose to perform. These kids still chose to perform. Same thing with Raphael Schachter was a composer and a conductor, and he conducted the Verdi Requiem inside the camp 20-something times using a broken down piano and one score. So people learned this massive work by rote from one score. And almost every time it was performed, they were sent away. And yet people kept coming. And I just could not fathom that level of fortitude and courage. And what Schachter said before one of the performances, and this is actually in the book, it's a quote from him. I wanted to put an asterisk there because they were his words, but I didn't want to draw the reader out of the moment because it's such a powerful moment. And he talks about the power of music and how they're going to, the performers are going to sing to the Nazis what they cannot say. That there will be a reckoning. God is coming for you. So the idea of music as hope, and this camp is unbelievable. A lot of people, it's not one of the camps that people hear a lot about.
Yeah.
There were weekly lectures on art and music, and there were weekly performances. And these people are starving, and they're still creating, including the kids. Some of these drawings and writings that these kids did, they were 7, 8, 9. It's unbelievable. One girl, I think it was Helga Weiss, drew a map of the camp that I used as my basis for all the descriptions in the camp. It's mind-boggling, the courage and the strength that these people found. So Ursula Becker, who is a rising opera star and is anointed the new diva in Berlin, finds out that she's a quarter Jewish. She starts dating Hitler's real-life nephew, who not many people know existed. Falls in love with him. They become engaged. Hitler, who was a huge opera fan, becomes obsessed with her, not only because she's engaged to his nephew Willie, but also because she looks exactly like his niece, who committed suicide after having an affair with her uncle. So that's the story, and Ursula ends up in this camp. So Ursula and Willie fall in love, and they decide, we need to get out of Dodge. So they're about to sail to England, and Ursula disappears. So Willie continues on to England and tries everything in his power to find her, and she, of course, is in the camp. So part 2, he doesn't know that yet, but part 2 of the book is, goes back and forth between Willie and Ursula in their chapters. Ursula trying to survive in the camp, doing what she has to survive, and Willie trying to find her. So that's so research. Oh, and I had written the whole first draft. And then it was sent, unbeknownst to me, it was sent to an agent in LA. And he wrote back and said, no one's ever looked at Hitler this way before, this side of Hitler. Willie Hitler, who not many people know even exists, his kids still live on Long Island, by the way.
Really?
Yes. Hitler's grandnephews live on Long Island. Anywho, that's a different thing. So I had written
sure that's not on their Christmas card every year.
Well, yeah. So I had written the whole thing, and one of the questions that this agent had, who's wonderful, he said, why would Hitler be so obsessed with a Jewish opera singer? Now, the reality is Hitler was a massive opera fan. He had 200 seats removed in the opera house so he could have a better view. Everything he did with the war, if you look at how opera, crescendos and decrescendos, and how the music, carries the emotion forward, he ran the war the way operas are created. He was all about drama and flair, something coming to a crescendo and then letting it fall again and let the pieces just fall into place before he rocked everyone's world again. It was his MO, certainly early on. Even if you watch him speak, the way he whips the crowd into a frenzy and then lets them, it's really amazing. He was a massive opera fan. But he also, his niece, Angela Raubel, his half-sister's daughter, he became her legal guardian when he was 40 and she was 23, and they lived together in Munich. And needless to say, it became involved, and they screamed at each other all the time. He adored her, but she didn't want to get married. Plus, he was her niece. Ew. And anyway, September 18th, 1931, I think, she shot herself in the heart with his revolver. The same revolver, by the way, he used to kill himself in the bunker. He also carried her picture next to his mother's in his suit pocket until his death. He was obsessed with this woman. And again, people kind of know about her, but not really. And this is all in the book. So Ursula, my female protagonist, the opera singer, she looks so much like Gelly that he's absolutely drawn to her. And then she's an opera star, so he's drawn to her. And then she becomes engaged to his nephew, and that just, he pushes him over the edge. So that's the story.
That's a beach read.
Yeah, it's heavy. And then after I wrote the first draft, so when this agent said, you know, why would he risk everything? It wasn't really risking everything. He was very established by that point. But it made me realize I had avoided this. I didn't want the book to be about Hitler, so I had not read that on purpose. But I went back and I read the very large book, The Life and Death of Adolf Hitler by Robert Payne. It is a terrible place to live in your mind. I could only read like 30 pages at a time. I didn't read Mein Kampf because I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I felt like I understood his mind enough to put really important information in there in terms of his internal motivations.
And also, like, do we give a shit? Like, do we care? Like,
right.
You know, like, we always want your antagonist to be real and full, but then there's some in real life you're like, I don't really fucking like, we're good.
Yes, and in fact, it's funny because I was recording because I've recorded some of one of my other books, so I had every intention of doing this audiobook. And I recorded a scene between Ursula and Hitler. And I had listened to Hitler. It's tough to find some footage of Hitler when he's not screaming, but actually he had a very pleasant baritone voice. And so I was trying to imitate him. And you know what? I had a devil of a time doing it. And I realized it was because I didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
I don't want to be him. And it's the first time that's ever happened to me as a character actor person. And anyway, so I decided, I still haven't really decided, but I think I don't want to do it.
Yeah. I mean, because that's some real life evil, right? Like, that's not in historical fiction, you know, obviously you're using things but creating this other stuff. But like, Hitler is it's such a thing. Yeah. Like, there are some things in life. It's like, I don't need a multi-layered view of this because I don't really care. Like, and maybe that makes me a bad person, but I don't give a fuck why.
Yeah. Well, and you know, like I said, I didn't want the book to be about Hitler. So I ended up writing a foreword or a preface to the reader describing Hitler. I think it's 3 pages, and a lot of it's about Hitler, but that's because I wanted to get it out of the way. Yeah. And the last paragraph is, this is not a book about Adolf Hitler. This is about the survivors. This is about honoring those people and moving forward and never forgetting what happened. So, and understanding so we can never have it happen again. So literally,
I mean,
the first couple lines in the book is, Hitler was a monster, except he wasn't. He was simply a man, megalomaniacal sociopath who convinced millions to join his cult.
Yeah.
And so that's led to a bunch of guest blog posts, like I'm doing a guest blog post at History Through Fiction. And it talks about why people are always still so interested in World War II. And also, and part of that is understanding how it happened. And people are I think it's easy to dismiss him as a monster. Oh, he was evil. But it's not that simple. Right. Because there were millions and millions of people that followed. So we really do need to try to understand this. And I know that, and I was also very aware, I'll actually let you ask a question. Yeah. But I was also very aware when I was writing it, the political situation.
Well, I mean, like, it's not that hard to understand why we need to understand that, right? Like, I am not a Trump guy. I am from Trump country, but like, the thing that is the most worrisome part of that whole thing is that people abandoned their own thought and became this cultish thing. And I'm like, this is literally how it happens.
Yeah.
Like, this is not like.
So while this was happening in our country, I'm reading The Life and Death of Adolf Hitler, and I'm like, oh my Lord. Yeah. It was surreal. So again,
and in a pandemic, and in
I was going to say, it was crazy. I would come out like the
Well, that was why I asked about the writing and the doing that stuff, because that stuff, like, being locked in is already hard enough as a writer, because when you're making worlds, like, you live in that world. That's the word. Like, non-writers don't understand when you are writing, that's your reality, and the real world is not real. Like, you have to bring yourself back into that, like, all right, I gotta eat and I got a family and fucking, oh God, the real people, I need to have relationships with those folks.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Because you're so those, at least that's the way it is for me. And so to immerse yourself in that world, in that time and place, without external stimulation, is a mind fuck.
Yeah. And you know, I hadn't really thought, maybe that's why I acted the way I acted in BJ's. There's a scene where
It's 100% why you did that.
yeah, where Ursula was thrown into the little fortress, which was the jail there at the camp. And I stopped writing for some reason for 2 or 3 weeks, and I kept thinking, I have to get her out of there. She's been in there for so long. Like, I gotta get her out of there. So yeah, that's true.
And there was probably some of that, like, you were living some of that because you're in your house and you're in your thing, and like all of that together is like, I'm being dead serious. Like,
I know, you're right.
The writing stuff is so, it's very easy to be like, well, that's this, like, that's fiction, or it's whatever, like, that's over here. But for me, that's reality. I can't write a thing until it's real up here in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And then I remember when I finished editing our book was about fucking Dungeons and Dragons and about how it impacted the world of computers and all that. It's like, it's not even I came out, and my friend who was painting my house said, "How are you doing?" And I burst into tears and walked back into the room because I was like, I don't know how I'm, like, I don't even know, like, what does that even mean? Like, how am I today? Like, what is, like, you know what I mean? Like, you're editing, and like, I'm like, that question is too hard for me to answer, because what 15 flavors of that do you mean?
Yeah.
So to be in a fictional world that is so mirroring what was happening at the time, you know, of course you buzz when you go out.
And you know, I had never thought of that I had left her in there for 2 or 3 weeks. Maybe I did that on purpose.
Yeah.
But you know, it's an excellent point. I know I'm going to end up referencing this interview in another interview, because I'm going to be like, Brad King asked me made a really good point, and I always try to give credit, so I will give you credit.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. Yeah, it's true.
It's one of those, it's why I've been so fascinated talking to people that have like done stuff during the pandemic, because writing is so hard as it is, and then whatever world you're in, you're already locked in a place, and then you are locked in another place, and it's just like the Russian dolls, right, where you're like, and I don't think that writers and artists acknowledge that about the craft that they do, that you really go into another place when you're doing it.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that's why it's so important to be out in the world, because then I can go out and I'm like, okay, like, I can breathe. And now I can just let the world interact with me instead of me interacting with the world. Yep. That makes sense.
Yep.
So,
well, yes, I always describe writing as an alone process, not lonely, because I'm not lonely, because, you know, your characters are your friends. It sounds crazy, but you know, they're with you. To your point, you know them. They're coming from the inside out. So, but it is very alone. So I think someone asked me the other day if I would ever stop teaching voice. And, you know, I go from being alone in my head and on the keyboard to outside, because when you're teaching, it's all about your body, and it's all about interacting with another body. And this is our instrument. So it's not like we're holding a trumpet. It's all about us, right? And your student. And so that connection is, I go from not being connected to anyone to being ultra uber connected to somebody in a matter of minutes.
And out of your head, right? Because you're in, like, you're experiencing what they're doing, and like, you literally get to leave all, that's what I mean. You get to leave all of that behind.
Yes, that's true.
And I don't think that artists, like, we never sit down and are like, oh shit, like, I need to actually do this to be fucking healthy. Otherwise, you just live in your head. And zero therapists are like, what you should do is live in your head all the time. Right? Like, that's never been a piece of advice that a therapist has given.
I think you should take up drinking. That would be helpful. Yeah.
This is vodka.
This is vodka.
Well, now Swan Song takes on a whole different, this sounds like a melancholy book. This is not a book that's going to end well.
Well, you're just going to have to read
it. But it's called Swan Song, so if it ends well, I'm going to argue with you about the name.
Yeah. So originally it was called Swan Song of a Jewish Diva. That was the original title, which I still love. But because there are a million swan songs out there, it turns out. But so yes, she has a bunch of swan songs. That's all I will say
Yeah.
because she lives in that
Yeah.
constant state of
Yeah.
fear. Yeah.
Yeah.
So absolutely. And interestingly, I'll go back to Hitler's nephews for a second. So
It's
William,
not a sentence that you say a lot.
no,
Back to Hitler's nephew.
well, actually, it is a sentence that I say a lot, but not most. Um, so I had written, I don't know, 3 or 4, not even chapters, maybe 2 chapters. And Kevin and I, my husband, were watching a documentary, World War II documentary, shocking. And they said something about William Patrick Hitler. And literally both of us turned to each other and said, who the hell's William Patrick Hitler? And I don't even remember the rest of the documentary because I was so the next morning I Googled him and I was like, what? William Patrick Hitler is Adolf's half brother, Alois. It's his son. Willie was his name. And so Alois married an Irish woman named Bridget Dowling, and they had one son named Willie who was raised in England. Willie's father, Alois, came to Germany because he basically was a lout and gambled and never came back and ended up marrying bigamously in Germany and having a son named Heinz, who ended up fighting for the Nazis and got killed in a Soviet prisoner of war camp. Okay, so that is a nephew that died, one of Hitler's nephews that died. So Willie was of the first marriage, the non-bigamous marriage. Willie went to Germany in 1930 something to take advantage of Uncle Alf, as he called him, Uncle Alf's kindness. And he worked in a car factory and he worked in a bank. When Hitler said, you need to join the party, Willie's like, yeah, I don't want to do that. And Hitler said, okay, get out. So he didn't kill him, he let him leave. But so Willie went back to England. Well, you can imagine when Willie came back to England, England was like, you're not welcome here.
Yeah.
With your last name and everything that's happened. So Willie really had no choice. I mean, like, he was pissed off. And so he wrote an article called Why I Hate My Uncle.
No
It was
shit.
picked up by Look magazine, which was owned by William Randolph Hearst.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It came out on July 4th of whatever year, and it sold out in like 2 hours on the
July 4th. Yeah, of course it did.
Right.
Yeah.
So Hearst was like, you know what? Why don't you come here? So Willie and his mother got on a plane or whatever and came to the United States and did an entire speaking tour about why I hate my uncle.
No shit.
And then in the end, I don't know how Willie met his wife. She was a German woman with a French name, really French name that I can't figure out. And when he had come to the United States after doing the speaking tour, he changed his last name to Stuart Houston, Stuart-Houston. 2 interesting points about that. One, hyphenated names were not super common back then. So I felt like if you're really going to change your name to something American, why don't you make it like Jones or Smith or whatever? But the other thing is that Stuart Houston was actually one of Adolf Hitler's earliest benefactors early in the party that helped him rise to chancellor. He was a huge financial backer of Hitler. So why would Willie, he said he just liked the name, but I just find it odd that so his kids, he had 4 boys, he settled on Long Island, had 4 boys, one passed away. The remaining 3, who are all in their 50s, are living in the same house where Willie lived with his wife and his boys. And he ran a medical facility, a medical like lab, blood processing or whatever out of the house. But he ended up fighting for the Allies. After he finished the speaking tour, he enlisted in the Navy and fought with the Allies, went back. And
I think that I knew this. Like, now that you said that, I'm like, I feel like I've heard that story before where Hitler's nephew fought for I think that's the thing that I know about him.
And when he went to get like his uniform and they said name and he goes Hitler and the guy goes, yeah, right. And I'm Goring, like it was
Yeah.
like, so, I mean, it's not, but not, there are no books. I found 0 books written about this man. I read everything I could read on the internet. His boys, who still live there on Long Island, there's been a play written. Everything that's in my book is on the internet.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing that I discovered. I wish I had
But I mean, because of course, right? Like if you're of that family, you're not like, well, we need to set the record straight. Like you have to want to just disappear from history.
Well, and interestingly, they all decided, they made a pact. This is what I read. They made a pact that they wouldn't have kids. And
Yeah.
I said, well,
Yeah.
it's obvious, right? I said that to someone recently, and she said, why would they do that? I said, because they don't want any Hitler blood to, like, any.
Yeah. You want to disappear from history. Like that makes everything about that makes, I feel that deeply in my bones.
So their father in this book, in Swan Song, is a hero. And, you know, he, from all accounts, lived quietly and was a great neighbor and ran his business and just wanted to live his life like his kids do. And I respect that.
Yeah.
But in this book, once I saw, so this was the really weird thing. The next morning after hearing his name on a documentary, I Googled him. His birthday was the same day that I had given my Ursula, my female protagonist.
Really?
Yeah, it was and I literally smiled and I was like, okay, clearly he needs to be in this book. And so he became her love interest, which was not the plan.
Yeah.
But it's actually one of my favorite scenes in the book is where they meet, because he does not like opera. And she, of course, this is what she does.
Yeah.
So it's this push-pull in the beginning with them. And it's one of my favorite scenes even now.
That's crazy. Like that is well, I can see how come you could write that during the pandemic, because that would have occupied a tremendous amount of brain space of just like, holy shit, like the weird rabbit hole of that stuff would just be so sort of like, it's not really research, right? Like it's so odd and you're like, what the fuck, that like every day sort of had to be like, what
Yeah, you know, you're right. And the interesting thing, like all these rabbit holes, for example, my friend Addie Applebaum, the one who was the director of the youth opera where all this started, I asked her if she would read the book. She actually read both versions of it, and ripped it apart in a good way. You know, she would email me and she'd say, you know, Germans never would have eaten that in that time. This is the wine, you should have at their dinner. Like that kind of detail. But one thing that she said, I had Willie taking a phone call from Hitler in I don't know what it was now, like 42, I think, in the book, because it's in different time periods. Like it starts in 33, then it goes to 35 or 38. Anyway, she said a phone call never could have gotten through. Well, that led me to, you know, really? Because that was a big deal. That phone call was critical in the story. And so I started sending out notes to anybody, like nextdoor.com. Can anybody provide? I mean, I really, truly was desperate. And I talked to somebody in Missouri who is a curator. I don't remember. Somebody knew somebody. Long story short, I realized that if it was going to take one person away from the story and reading it, I had to rewrite it. So I created a spy that didn't exist in the first draft. And it's so much better because Willie ends up going to this pub, this dark pub, to meet this guy. And he has a face-to-face conversation with one of Hitler's spies that's wedged into London. So it was so much stronger, that kind of detail. Another example is I had Willie and Ursula get on Hitler's plane to fly to the Berchtesgaden, to the Berghof, his estate. And all of a sudden I was typing like Schroeder on the piano, like madly in my zone. And then I was like, oh, right, Hitler's plane. I should probably look that up. So I look up Hitler's plane. Well, which plane? At the height of his power, he had like 38 or 52 planes. And I was like, oh. So that led to 2 days of research. And during my research, I found out that cabin pressurization, because I have them having a conversation on the plane, occurred in 1938. Luckily, this happened to be taking place in 1938, so I decided that they would not need oxygen masks because Hitler would want the most up-to-date technology on his plane and therefore would have had cabin pressurization. I mean, I could go on and on. I won't bore you, but I could go on and on with that kind of detail that stopped my writing cold. And led to usually between 6 hours and 2 days of research.
Yeah. Well, you're lovely and wonderful, and I'm glad that we got to do this again. And this also, like, I feel like I'm saying this more and more on the video programs. Like, this is way longer than it's supposed to be, but it was so goddamn fascinating. I'm like, well, we're just gonna keep going. Like,
Thank you. It's always my pleasure to talk to you, my friend.
I know it's like it's a lot of fun, and like this even though the story is heavy, like it's the background of that is fascinating. Like it's just fascinating, and so I'm
Well,
excited.
and sorry to interrupt you, but ultimately, my books are about I'm driven by light and compassion and kindness and all of that jazz. Um, all that jazz. But this, the transfer, the ideas of choices and consequences of choices are critical in this book.
Yeah, I mean,
Also, the
obviously.
question of a sliding moral scale.
Yeah,
If a woman sleeps with a guy, it's considered and gets paid for it, it's prostitution. If you sleep with someone for a winter coat just to survive or steal some bread, is that so? This sliding moral scale is also. Ursula goes through a severe transformation. She doesn't know she's Jewish, and her sister, who I haven't even mentioned, her sister is based on Ava Braun. She is Ava Braun. Everything that happens with her sister, except for the fact that her sister is a violin prodigy, everything that happens with her sister is based on real stuff, and it's all in the book. At the end of the book, I have a note to the reader
yeah.
that talks about what's real and what's not. So at one point, her sister, who's like 13 at the time when Ursula finds out she's Jewish, her sister says, very real, very innocently, "You don't look Jewish. You don't act like you're Jewish." And Ursula says, "What does that mean?" And her sister then describes what a Jew is based on what she's heard for the last 5 years growing up under a Nazi regime.
Yeah.
And so, Ursula undergoes this transformation where she's a diva. She needs no one. She is self contained beauty, right? And as she goes through this transformation of physical deformity from being beaten and things, she realizes that there are people, there's a community if she would just allow herself to accept it and in turn give back.
Yeah.
So there's this underlying transformation that's going on that is based on kindness, compassion, love, empathy that I haven't really talked about, but hopefully that comes through in the book. I'm told it does based on readers' comments, but readers have to decide.
Yeah. Well, this has been lovely, and I'm so excited to read this book. I've said it so many times on the show, like historical fiction was never really my bailiwick, and then
Uh-huh.
the pandemic hit, and now I read rom-coms, thrillers, and historical fiction.
Yeah.
Like this is my new that's been the jam that I've been in. I'm like, yeah, these are all things that I can escape into that I don't have to fucking deal with the world. So I'm really
Yeah.
excited to pick this up. And thank you for spending we spent a lot of time. Thank you for spending time with me during the holiday season.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And I'm not sure when this is running, but if it's
Friday.
Oh, okay. Well, if people want to go to my website, elizabethsplaineauthor.com, there is still time to order books. All 4 of my books are out. And there's also something called a roadie reader box on there that has my book, Swan Song and or Devil's Grace in it, along with handcrafted items made by Rhode Islanders. There is a
Oh,
B-clef
you
chocolate
did that
bar.
before, didn't you?
Mm-mm.
Oh,
I
this
mean,
is new?
it's been running for a couple months.
Okay.
The candle called Swan Song in there. There are tissues with Swan Song on when you cry, and there's a beautiful bookmark that has a swan on the end. And this is all available on my website. You can go to my website, elizabethsplaineauthor.com, and
It's the front picture.
it's the front picture.
I'm
You've
looking
looked.
at it right. I'm literally looking at it
Oh,
right now.
thank you,
Yeah.
Brad. Yeah. And
Well,
thanks for your time.
yeah, no, this is great. It's lovely talking to you, and I'm looking forward to doing it again and picking up the book and all of that stuff.
All right, thank you, my friend. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you too. Well, there you have it. That was Elizabeth B. Splaine. Her book Swan Song is out right now, and I told her off air these video interviews are getting longer and longer than they were intended to be, and it's because shit like that happens. Like that was a fascinating interview, taking a deep dive into the history of the book, which I was not expecting, and I could have talked about that all day. I hope you enjoyed listening and watching as much as I loved having that conversation. Before we get out of here, just a couple reminders. If you like what you heard, do us those 2 favors I talked about at the top of the program. Tell your friends about us, particularly those people that like books, and leave us a review, either on Apple Podcasts if you have an iPhone, or the Facebook page at the Writers Jam if you don't. Don't forget to check out all of the other programs on the Solid Listen Podcast Network, including the flagship Mother May I Sleep With podcast with host and our Solid Listen Podcast queen, Molly McLear. Don't forget These video podcasts come out on the Solid Listen Network YouTube channel every Monday and Friday. You can also find them over at the Writers Jam, and you can catch the audio version wherever you listen to the Downtown Writers Jam. And that program is out every Wednesday. With all that stuff happening, the easiest way not to miss anything we do, get yourself subscribed wherever you listen to podcasts. And remember, you can always catch us on Twitter and Instagram at The Writers Jam. Until the next time, I will see you around the internet.